back to another episode of Raise 'Em Up here in season 4. Still kind of crazy to think that we are 4 seasons in so far. It's somewhat halfway or part of the way through. We're not halfway through just yet because we're here in chapter 4 of Justin Earley's Habits of the Household, Practicing the Story of God in Everyday Family Rhythms. And today I have with me, it's just 2, we're down to 2. Uma had former commitments. And so who do I have with me today?
Melanie Schultz, Director of Adult Discipleship.
Jan Martin, Director of Kids Ministry.
There you go. And both of y'all are professionals.
And who are you?
I am Pastor Lee Hope, all right? Next gen pastor. But both of y'all are professionals in a sense, not me, because I don't have kids, right? And so this is a really interesting particular chapter. And I feel like it's going to be an interesting discussion for us because it's about screen time.
Yep.
And we had some of us that were pushing back, didn't love it. And then others of us that, like, I know, Melanie, your word for it is very strong.
Yeah.
And then I was sitting there, I was like, I love this just as a single guy. Like, I really appreciated a lot of what it said. And it's kind of, there's a piece of me in general, like I think people have probably picked up on this as we've gone through all these conversations over all these books, of wanting different habits for myself or rhythms for myself. And so that's where it's so interesting, because even as just someone that works with kids or things like that, I found this so helpful in looking at screen time. What I found so interesting too, though, was it was mostly about entertainment. You know, so it's mostly about TV, like TV shows or movies or things like that, which I don't know why that, I think it got to me because, like, when I think of screen time, I think of social media, I think of phones, I think of emails, I think of these things.
Yeah.
But like the bigger world of parenting and the bigger world of kids is games.
Hand them a tablet and they play, or, you know, they watch a show or something. Yeah.
Exactly. But I absolutely loved, and I appreciate it too. He's done such a great job of just making it real really fast. And so I appreciate on page 94, he said it's hard to overemphasize how difficult the nonstop nature of parenting is.
Oh, yeah.
And I just love that he said that, because like, you can't overemphasize. Like parenting is tough. Parenting is hard. So I love how he's meeting every single parent exactly where it goes. And then it gets into this idea of screen time, and especially limits and boundaries and things like that. And I really appreciate it. Again, it's a brilliant book. Like we were talking a little bit beforehand, this is becoming easily one of my favorite books about ministry or like, I can't even call it ministry. Life of a disciple, right?
Discipleship,
and so I appreciate where he started it too, of just talking about the fight. All right.
Yeah.
So how there's going to be a fight when you have this real conversation about screen time, but really overemphasizing the fight is totally worth it. And that was really the perspective of his wife. But I know that's where I wanted to start. Where are you guys at when you think about this chapter?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
As I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about all the different approaches I've seen to screen time and how to manage it with your kids. And there are so many whys, but it seems like there are so many more why nots. You know, why not screen time? Because of this, and this. I loved the way that this sort of flipped the tables, where he was able to identify, you know, that screen time is not evil by nature. It's neutral or potentially good depending on how you use it. But it certainly can be used for evil, sure. But it's neutral. And so the why behind it really shone through in this book. And it was like, it gives you permission to use it with comfort and control and confidence, knowing that it's going to be used for the formation of your kids' lives and development, rather than the scary reasons why to avoid technology, or the reasons why we just shove it in our kids' faces so that we can go do other things. Like the solid why behind, you know, making your choices when you give your kids screen time is just a great way of looking at it. That didn't feel like a fear tactic. It didn't feel like crazy amounts of pressure. It didn't feel like a last resort, like sometimes you just got to deal and you got to shove this in your kid's face and survive. So I really appreciated the why or why nots that were here in the book.
And there's a key word you said there that I don't want to miss, which is formation.
Formation,
that was radical for the start of the book, or the start of the chapter, and how it said that. Because it's basically saying, I still remember very vividly, as I was reading, I was reminded of my vicarage, right? They had a school, and I remember very vividly a bulletin board that was hanging up in the school that said, if we won't teach them, the world will. Okay? So it's just the importance of just Christian education, discipleship, that kind of a thing. And that's what he's talking about with this formation, except for the way he phrased it was, if we don't teach them, their screens will.
Yes. Yep.
And that hit me as the guy that used to be the student ministry pastor, as the next gen pastor. It was like so true. And especially talking about the powerful stories that are told on screens. And we know, like the English major in me was nerding out on so many different pieces of this too, of just what are the stories teaching? What are they telling and things like that. And I just found that so important. I loved the reference to Romans 12:2 of not being
we're either being conformed to the world or being formed by God, transformed by God.
Exactly. And that word form of the formation, right? So ultimately the whole thing is, and I hope that's what our listeners are kind of hearing, is that that's your goal as a parent, is to form your kid.
Yep.
Form them from a boy to a man, form them from a girl to a woman, and release them out into the world fully formed, right? That's the job in front of you. And so I really appreciate the insights it gave about screen time in there. But Jane, I hadn't heard from you yet.
No. So I had a tougher time with this chapter. And when I was reading it, I was like, oh, yeah. So when my kids were younger, I absolutely was in total control of screen time. Like I was the big bad mom who nobody got a phone until they were in 8th grade or 13 or, But then once they got the phones, then I was like, oh. Then I'm reading going, oh, yeah, wait, no, I got to go back and reset some limits, which is going to be really painful now that they're teenagers. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to tell a teenager that's something we've been doing for a while now. So I guess only a couple years for one of them. But I'm like, yeah, we probably need to go back in reverse to that.
And that's the challenge that the author and his wife talk about. Like, that's what they decided they were going to do at the beginning of this chapter, is like, we've got to change our screen time in our house because we're noticing that they're being formed in ways that are not helpful to them spiritually or to our family. And so I love on page 95, they hit the Romans 12:2 about being conformed or transformed. But I liked the way it was phrased here. A human heart is never not being shaped by something. So, and to take out the double negative, your heart is always being shaped by something. So even if you're just giving your kid that screen time for 30 minutes a day so that you can have your downtime, whatever you're handing them in that screen is going to have an effect on their heart. And so if your kid is on their phone for any given amount of time, that's going to impact them, period, just the way that it impacts us. And we know this to be true. We know it to be true when we reflect honestly about how we feel when we put down our social media or when we pick up the news. Or so we need to just be using that as a lens as we look at our kids. What am I handing to them and how is it forming them? And be intentional about that.
And then the bigger picture that I deeply appreciated as they play this chapter out was also, how are you forming them by giving them that screen? So not just that. So basically what I'm getting at is this: you're creating a situation where your child is isolated from you. Okay. And again, that sounds so like doomsday-ish, but it's just kind of pointing out what it is. Your child is learning in that moment to live life by themselves in a bubble watching a screen, even though it's meant to be, I just need a break, okay?
Yeah.
So, and that's why, again, more of the heart. And I think, like, the other thing I really appreciated about Justin and Lauren's kind of conversation back and forth was they realized they needed limits. And that's what really hit me, again, as that single guy. I was like, because I like my sister, fantastic reader, reads easily 100 books a year. Like, she's a teacher. Granted, she's a high school teacher. She's always trying to find young adult literature, things like that. So that's a lot of the books that she's reading, but just super well read. My mom does the same thing. And a lot of times with my sister, I'm like, where do you find the time?
Yeah.
And a lot of times too, I look at my own work, right? A lot of times I got in this habit really early in my ministry of going home and letting screen time be my brain break, my stop thinking about work, stop doing all this other stuff.
I wish we could do a show of hands out there for the listeners right now to see if that's the same. Because I think that's our go-to.
We can raise our hands.
Many of us. Yeah.
Exactly. You want that brain break. You want the other things. And I'm sure as a parent, then you want you go through a whole day of work and then you have to parent.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, you can't overemphasize how much work it is to be a parent. And so it was like, okay, I need my own healthy boundaries when it comes to screens. Like, that was so refreshing to read and to see. And I'm almost like having deja vu in this podcast, like sitting here talking about this, because this continues to be a theme. Like, oh yeah, we all have work to do when it comes to screens.
Yep.
But then kind of getting it back to it is very much about how this is crucial. This is critical. I would go so far as to say it is critical for the formation of your kid. Now, that said, I love what you kind of mentioned too early on. Justin and Lauren, don't shy away from you're not going to do this perfectly. And this will especially come out in the next chapter. Doing anything is better than doing nothing.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So even just starting with something, and I know this, I'm probably skipping ahead on this one, but I remember they even said toward the end, like, even if you just pick 24 hours a week to say, we're just not doing screens, that is a step forward.
Yeah.
And maybe it's an evening. Maybe you have to start with an evening. Tonight, we're not doing screens. We're just not. And this is everybody. This is a whole household. This is not just for kids. This is parents too. What does it mean to actually turn it off or never turn it on?
Well, and that's where I think, like, so reading this, I was like, oh my goodness, I am setting the example for my kids. So when we're sitting in the, watching a movie as a family together, and I've got my phone out scrolling through Facebook because I haven't had a chance to look at anything all day long. What am I showing my kid? I mean, we're sitting here, we're supposed to be watching this movie together, talking about this movie, and I'm on my phone.
And that's another thing to bring up. One of the things that they invite you to do differently with screen time or with entertainment is when you do use it communally.
Yes.
And so this isn't about like, well, we're just going to throw out our TV and get rid of the tablets and, give everybody a crummy, flip phone thing that's not going to work. Well, now flip phones are back. Anyway.
Are they really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, fancy ones were like anyway, we'll get, different podcast, different time. But instead of just throwing it out as though it's all a mess, we're going to use this. And when we do use it, we have to be engaged with it with our kids. And that is a challenge because I think so many of us as parents, and maybe it's just me, if I'm the only one, then shut my mouth. But I use screen time as a way to get everything else done. I put on Bluey so that I can put a load of dishes in or whatever. I let the kids have 30 minutes of screen time while I'm doing, making dinner, something like that. But that to shift the perspective of screen time happens communally so that we can be directly involved in the spiritual formation of our kids as they encounter this material, that is a different layer of expectation, but it's also such a wonderful outcome. It's so huge.
And I think it's even bigger than that because I think that word communally is at the heart of what this chapter says. But I honestly, like reflecting on the previous 3 or 4 sections that we've read, that's the theme of the book.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. We reference in next chapter references Don Everett's book, The Spiritually Vibrant Home, season 2 of Raise Them Up. And I appreciated that because this is so much building upon what Don set out there. And in Don Everett's book, particularly in the chapter about the biblical understanding of household, he brings this out. And I appreciate Justin so much for fleshing out even deeper in that, like, the whole purpose of a family, the whole purpose of a household is to be in community. All right, and talk about the theological deep dives we could go here. I mean, I love a lot of times when there's a Sunday after Easter, after Pentecost, after Ascension, after Pentecost, you get Holy Trinity. And it's the one Sunday of a year where we talk about the doctrine of the Trinity, of who God is. He's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And one of the very common themes that you hear when you talk about who our God is at his core is that he's in community with himself, right? And again, greatest mystery of the Christian faith, we could talk forever, but God himself is community. He designs us to be in community. And that's why like loneliness and mental health is such an issue right now for us. And so as we keep going through, then this is why it's so important for us as a household to like be in community together and to learn what that means as we keep going. And that's why I deeply appreciate this. And with this picture of community then too, like it's the idea of setting limits within a household. And that's what I so appreciate too. And I really appreciate it because I find myself saying this sometimes about talking about how blessed we are to live in this country, but how much it shapes us culturally too. Because on 97, it says, in the American story, limits are bad. They get in the way of our freedom, which means we need to get rid of all limits to be happy. But in the story of God, limits are the way to good life, even the way to happiness. We know this because Jesus took on limits of being a man, disciplining himself into a life of sacrifice. Why? So that we could be free from the ultimate limitation of sin and death. I love that.
Yes, reframing that the ultimate limitation is sin and death. That is the only thing that is going to cause you an ultimate ending, an ultimate limitation. That's beautiful.
And I loved the picture then of the playground and the kids on the cliff, right?
Yeah.
So if you had this high up cliff with walls around it, you're good with the kids playing in it, but then remove the walls and the kids are all terrified in the middle. Yeah. And so it's kind of that thing of like, if you try and let kids live without any boundaries at all, the world becomes very scary.
Yeah.
And you don't teach them how to navigate. If you're not there with them, trying to help navigate where the good limits are for things, then that's what's going to happen is there's a very jaded perspective of the world and all things.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to find the right limitations. You can't get rid of all of them. And you can't have limitations on every single part of their life, right? And keep them caged in like a wall. But you do have to have limitations.
And it really is about the process of starting with boundaries that are appropriate for your kids and then moving the guardrails as they are available, as they're able to comprehend more or as they move into different levels of maturity. Because sometimes I think we get stuck in a pattern of this works for me. Mm-hmm. And so then I'm scared to let my kids out of this bubble because I understand this one and I don't know what to expect in the next one. So I know what my kid's tablet can do. I'm terrified of what a phone can do. So I don't want to make that transition or, fill in the blank with your own concerns. But I think, this picture of limitations as a way to give freedom and to provide security and confidence and the ability for kids to really enjoy without feeling like there's no control. Like that's a terrifying feeling. It really is to feel like you're just kind of floating out there with no limitations, no boundaries.
Exactly. And it's at this point of the chapter too that I think Justin makes a really smart move of going back to where he started of parents, we all hear this is going to be tough.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard.
He says it's going to be painful.
It's going to be painful.
Yes. It's not just going to be hard. This is going to hurt.
It is. And he says it's going to be worth it. And I love what he did. Yes. I love what he did for you guys as parents because he compares you to Jesus, right? Not in the perfect sense,
Thank goodness.
but in the sense of Jesus went through all of that and we would all say as his children, totally worth it. Yep. Absolutely worth it. The pain that he endured for us. And basically what Justin and Lauren are trying to say here is, look, we've been through it. We know we're right there with you. But whatever little you can do is going to be worth it in the end. Whatever limitations you can. And it's going to be painful and it's going to hurt, but you're going to take that for the sake of your kids. And it sounds so weird to talk about something like this. Well, as parents, talk about that. Because I know like that might sound dramatic the way I just said it. Jesus on the cross is the same as limitations on screen time. But unpack what we mean by painful. And I'm sure all the parents here can resonate with it. But just in case we got youth leaders or other people listening.
I think he says this. He says, your kids are going to want the screens. Like let's say you decide to make a change in your home and you're going to limit it. You're going to set things aside, change things. Their kids are going to want them, but you are going to want them even more because you are going to not want to have a nagging child or a screaming child or an irritable teenager. You are going to want to have the brain break. And by committing to an adjustment and setting an appropriate boundary about screens and screen time in your house, it says there is a true loss to parents' time and capacity. It says, but as parents, we take the pain now so kids don't have to later. And so I think that's what it means. Like we have come to rely on it. So it's as much a stretch for us as it is for our kids. And he's not sweeping it under the rug, like saying, well, it's going to be so worth it, that you won't even notice. No, you're going to notice and it's going to be painful, but it's in that where you're going to be refined as a parent, they're going to be refined as kids, and that's going to bear fruit in the long run.
And that formation piece.
Yep.
And it ties back into that discipline chapter, right? Parenting takes our time. I mean, it's so easy was so easy when my kids were younger and I needed to cook dinner. Let me put this TV show on and you guys sit right there and watch that while I finish because you're hungry and you're driving me crazy, asking me every 2 minutes, when's dinner ready? Or even worse, when they were younger and really wanted to help me, they want to come help me. And I'm thinking of the mess that I'm going to have to clean up afterwards. And I'm like, no, you just sit there and watch that show.
Yeah.
And mom's going to go take care of this.
Or the temptation, it's going to be so bad or the food's going to whatever. And at the end of the day, it's going to be edible, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully, maybe. Yeah. But, the screens are gone. So then, come help me cut this last vegetable. Come help me put these things on the table. And please don't drop it so it breaks on the floor.
There's a great episode of Bluey about that.
Bluey, that's so funny. Well, so, and this is the point of the chapter too. If you've been listening and you've been like, oh my goodness, what kind of limits are they talking about?
Yeah.
I think this is where for lack of a better word, the chapter kind of blossoms and gives you a little hope with kind of, as they lay out for you, what are the possibilities in front of you as they turn the conversation to curation.
I like how they change it from, we're setting these strict limits, we're taking these, causing these painful things, to let's curate the use of these.
Yes. And you think of a curator, so for those not familiar with that term, like if you're in a museum, there's someone who has designed every piece of what you experience there. What goes here, what goes there, the lighting, the things that are written. And so that whole experience has been curated, has been designed, has been created. And then from there, right, as a participant in the museum, you get to choose your own path, right?
Yep.
But ultimately, so it's not everything and it's overwhelming, but there's this beautiful experience almost. And the invitation of this chapter then is for you as parents to then curate in so many ways. I would go as far as to say not just screen time, but the community that's going to happen within your household, which sounds like we're going to get a little preview in the conversations piece too, down the line. But I just loved that piece, like particularly when it came to some of the ideas that it placed in front. Now, we talked before this thing started, before we hit record, that like it was hard. And one of the reasons why was because Justin and Lauren are practicing what we might call radical limits.
Yes.
Because only 2 nights a week, it seems like, do they have screens on in their house.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal. But again, I don't think Justin and Lauren are saying you have to jump into any of this.
No.
It's just listen to all the different pieces that they're talking about. So like here, like the next section, as we think about curating, they talk about all these different possibilities. And again, it's just a limit or a rhythm or a habit. And I go to the title of the book that can help your family. And so one of those, the first ones that starts out with is family movie nights. Okay. So the idea of picking a designated night of the week and that you're going to watch a movie together. Now, a little later in the chapter, I appreciate how he says, because this is like, I've told you guys, like, I would love to be like a professor almost, and like have a syllabus, if you will, of what we're going to learn when it comes to teaching or something like that. And like that's basically what he's saying here is have your own watch list. Like that's what Lauren has created. There's a resource on their website for it. But like the idea of, and I love when it got to like, don't go new, go for quality.
Go for quality.
Yeah.
Pick
and so
like,
like,
movies that are classic.
I skipped way ahead.
Yeah, to the
but,
picking.
But it will apply to the family movie nights piece of like, watch Toy Story, watch Hercules, watch Pinocchio,
watch The Sandlot.
Watch the Sandlot. I know, we'll get there.
That's one of my favorite movies
me too.
I'm just
Top
saying.
10 easy.
But I appreciated it, right? But like the idea of setting a certain night and then having your own syllabus, your own list of what you want to watch through with your family and watch communally and then pause and talk when it's time to do that. I mean, since we mentioned Sandlot, like let's go there, right? So it's later in the chapter. Yeah, I'm skipping around. Sorry. But he talks about, I remember the Sandlot vividly. And it's funny, like the moments he's talking about, I remember feeling so awkward watching them. Okay, so like they very much
like the first time that you watched it, or when you rewatched it when you were older.
No. I'm
Both,
telling you, the Sandlot was on in our house at least once a week growing up, from the ages of like easily 7 to 13. Okay, right? Yeah, because my brothers loved the Sandlot.
So when you were 7,
watched it all the time.
You noticed stuff.
Oh yeah, it was highly sexualized, all this other stuff.
Wendy,
and I was sitting there going, "This doesn't feel right," but nobody talked about it. Nobody talked about it. They're doing drugs, like drugs is the tobacco. I was like, I knew that wasn't right. The things they're saying about or to each other, like I knew all these different pieces, but my brothers loved the movie, so like we watched it all the time. And my parents were happy because we were in front of a screen, and this was the 90s, friends. So some things don't change. But anyways, like I appreciate how Justin kind of says in these moments, right, when they first watched it, he pauses and says, let's talk about that. Yeah. Like, and when they, like the whole fake kiss for, is it Wendy?
Yeah, when they,
And like when they, like basically that's a non-consensual kiss, and like they pause it to talk about that. And I was like, good. Like I wish somebody was saying that when I was growing up.
And he's not saying like, and that's the thing I love about this. He's not throwing out everything that has a hint of indecency. He talks about how your kids are going to get exposed to things.
But
and so this gives you an opportunity to talk about it, not to throw out the cool things about the Sandlot, the teammates and the friendship and, like perseverance.
I was trying to recover my reputation real quick because like some people might be like, Pastor Lee hates the Sandlot.
No,
I was like, no.
Great
Like, and again, that stuff was the awesome stuff that stood with me.
Yeah.
Overcoming challenges, being creative, friendships, all this other stuff. Super blessed by all of that. Finding friendship. What does it mean to be the new kid and learn how to find friendship?
Well, and
so
even
many
like
blessings.
changing your expectations about people and things you don't know, or fears that you had. So many good things.
Yeah. So it's not a trash, but the opportunity to be that curator.
Yeah.
So we're watching this. Let's talk about this. Let's pause. And I love too, at one point he says like, in their house, they let the credits roll, right? Because in the credits is where you think about the movie, you talk about the movie, things like that. And I just got done seeing a movie in the theaters, and that's exactly what happens. You're sitting there like talking to your friends. That was awesome. That was great. I can finally talk about this.
Yeah.
Because the movie's over.
Yeah.
So like, oh gosh, and you just spend some time talking about it. So
and
I thought
wait
that was
for the
awesome.
end credits.
And and he does give some caveats, like family movie nights are great, but you don't have to commit yourself to the prison of doing it every single time. Like, so if there is a night when the kids are happy watching a movie and you and the spouse need to go and do laundry or something, he says, sometimes we catch up on cleaning or we just relax when they're watching. But in general, we have this communal time together to watch these movies with our kids. So again, it's the why behind it. It's the formation. It's, knowing what my kids are watching and being able to be a presence and a guide in their conversations about it.
And ask questions. It's that old love and logic. Just ask a question. Like,
what'd you think about that? Yeah.
What'd you think about that? Tell me more about that. Like pausing it when it's awkward because it's awkward. Is that fun as parents? I feel like I would have so much fun with that.
So my daughters know that we're going to talk about everything.
Yeah.
I mean, from early on, I was always like, if they ask the question, I'm going to answer the question. There's always the why. I mean, you have to be careful because at certain ages or whatever, but when they're asking that question,
it's time.
They're curious and it's time to start answering those questions. But we would be watching a show and I didn't always stop it in the middle of the show. We might talk about it at the end.
I'm wondering if I'll be that dad.
My poor daughters are like, please don't ask her. Just don't.
Well, like I wonder if I'll be the dad that pauses
it.
It. I wonder if I'll be the dad that pauses it at like the most awkward moment. To just
don't leave that frozen on the screen, whatever it is.
Because I still remember like I went to see Titanic in the theaters with my mom, and she did the whole turn my head into because she knew it was coming, the drawing scene.
Oh my gosh.
And so I didn't see anything, and then I remember seeing Titanic in the theaters multiple times. Okay, so I had to turn both times, so I didn't see anything at all.
Yeah.
But I feel like I wonder if I'll be that dad that like pauses it and it's like, all right, we're going to talk about this because you're looking at it, you've seen it, and then it's going to be like, oh gosh, Dad, why are you doing that?
And they will. Here's the thing, they will.
Yeah.
But in the long term, I think they're going to appreciate it. Mine haven't quite reached that yet, but I do think one day they're going to appreciate that we'd called out and talked about.
Yeah, because otherwise, what's happening? They're seeing it. They have no idea how to process it. So they're going to process it either alone in their own thoughts with no guidance or with friends or on
the internet.
They're going to learn that they can talk to you about it.
Yes.
Right? You are a safe place that it can actually do that. Like I know I've shared this story in the podcast before, but I'll be brief about it. Like my first summer here, like having a movie night when I was out of town with Captain America Civil War, Marvel. I love Marvel, but I screened it the week before just to double check myself because it was my first summer as a pastor, first summer as the youth guy, and realized how much it cusses all the time. And I was horrified because we were about to show this movie at church.
Yeah.
And what I did was I sent an email out to all of our families saying, hey, by the way, I screened this movie. I apologize. We're still going to go with it because that's what we've advertised. But this is a great opportunity to talk to your kids about, did you notice all the cussing?
Yeah.
Did it feel awkward that it was at church? Why did it feel awkward that it was at church and not when you watched it in the theaters or when you watch it at home?
Right.
Like stuff like that. So just be able to talk about something as simple as cussing or something like that. So again, that idea of curating the experiences. I'm going to skip one and then we can come back to the other one because he also talked about like Sunday cousin movies. I thought that was great too, designating a night where there's even more community involved.
Yeah.
Where like they let the cousins go downstairs and watch a movie. They pick the movie. They know they know what it is. And that's an opportunity for, they know they're safe and the adults get to have their adult time for that.
Right. And it's not 12 kids on different screens. It's 12 kids watching the same movie and having the same, memories together.
So that's another screen time it gets. I really loved the screen endless car rides.
Oh my goodness. That was one that I was like, oh. Because when my kids were littler, the big thing was to have, people were starting to get the movie things in their car. Like they weren't built in yet like they are now. But it was, you'd buy the one that went over the backrest. Yeah, the headrest on the front seat. And I remember when we first got one, we got it for a road trip we were taking. We were taking this really long drive and we were like, okay, we're going to get it. But then they wanted it every time we got into the car. And we were like, no, it's got to be for rides that are at least over an hour long, okay?
Yeah.
And that was going back to Port Neches and Beaumont to see family. So I'm like, that's a 2-hour car ride. We can put them on for that. But they'd get mad because they're like, well, the car next to us has a movie on. Okay, we're going to the grocery store. You don't need to watch
Which
TV.
is funny. I don't see that as often anymore. Like, I really haven't seen it in the last 5, 10 years.
Well, because everybody has their own device now. So everybody's watching their own movie now.
And he gets that, right? He talks about that. So like they know in town, there's no screens, there's no phones, there's no movies, there's none of that. And then I appreciated even on the long car rides, for the first hour and a half, there's no screens. You know, there's just conversations. What opportunities? And I think about like how when I'm a passenger in a car on a long drive, how much I love. It's not so much people watching as creation watching. So just seeing the beautiful world we live in, just seeing the variety of communities that are all around us and things like that. So I appreciated just that whole. And again, it just with all of these, I'll go back to some simple faith stuff. So season 1. Sticky faith. Sticky faith. Being able to say something out loud, and it's like in our house, we don't use phones in the car.
Yeah.
We don't have screens in the car, you know? And it's just being able to say that and being able to label it. And a little later in this chapter even says that, like being able to say something out loud helps it to actually happen.
Yep.
And I think that ties in so well too about movies at friends' houses or screens with friends, you know? And so I appreciated how there were just certain rules. In our house, we ask an adult before we watch a movie. In our house, these things. And so when you go over to a friend's house, or you got to ask a parent before you can watch. And I still go back. Did I tell the 5th grade story of me? At a sleepover when my parents, somewhere along the raise them up journey, I have told this story, but I'll repeat it again because it's
new season.
It's a new season. It might be a new audience. Who knows? And I remember my mom telling me at some point she realized she was never going to have to worry about me. And I said, okay, that's interesting. Why do you say that? She goes, you were at a sleepover when you were like 10. And I remember this very vividly. She said, and they were going to watch an R-rated movie as a family. It was actually a whole family was going to watch it. And so I knew the rule. And again, I don't even remember my parents making this rule, but I knew the rule that you have to ask a parent. Or like I was not supposed to watch an R-rated movie. So I called my mom. I knew my phone number to my house. I called her and I said, hey, just double checking. They're watching an R-rated movie. This is the movie. I'm just making sure, like, can I watch this?
Yeah.
And to which they're on the other end of the phone just delighted that I even called in the first place because I guess my other siblings wouldn't have done that. And they said, well, you know, we really would rather you not watch that. And I said, okay, well, I'll just pack up my stuff and walk home then. And so it was one of those.
Yeah,
because they were going to watch it. I didn't want to be disruptive and stop their family time. And I wonder what in the world my friend thought. I wonder what those parents thought. But it was one of those, like, I knew the rules and I followed through on the rules. And so the same thing's true, though. They mention how when friends come over to your house, it's okay to say, hey, cell phones are in the basket at this house. You know, you can't sit on the couch by yourself and just be on your phone.
And that, like, honestly, it's really important. It's so easy for something to happen when there are not parents around. Like, I remember watching 2 different movies in my childhood in somebody's, 2 different houses in their basement when my mom and dad were like upstairs hanging out with the adults and the kids were playing in the basement and one of the kids turns on a movie. And I have terrible memories of like being 6 or 7 or 9 or 10 and watching this stuff and being either really scared because it was a scary movie or really confused because there were some sexual scenes in it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And like my parents didn't have a clue. Not because they were, being negligent, but it's just like I didn't have a script of what to do if something comes on that I don't really know about, or I didn't have that in place where if somebody's trying to turn on the TV in a house that you're not used to, make sure that you call mom and dad or or ask
check
or
with
say,
an adult.
is this an okay show for us to watch? I don't know. It might feel like that's a crazy thing to try to implement, but man, I think it's really cool. And I think it's doable. Like I really do. I think it's possible for you to work with your kids to say, I'm not going to say no to everything, but I do want you to be aware that some things are appropriate for you and some are not. And, that there's some things that we set in place, and this is what we do as a family, and this is why.
And it goes back to some of the stuff we talked about a little bit earlier on this episode of just, it's not about doing it fully right, or it's not about abstinence. It's not about completely getting rid of screen time. Right. It's about being able to curate the experience. Yep. So again, talk about like when the drawing scene in Titanic comes in, or the lovemaking scene in the car or whatever.
Yeah.
Like be able to pause and be like, what do you think? Why, like, should we watch these things or not? Like, should we fast forward through them? Should that be the practice in this household? Like, what do you, like, why would it be dangerous to watch these scenes for us, like mentally and stuff like that? Because again, there's the lusting piece and all that other stuff. Like you can do that conversation with your kid with it on pause at the most awkward point.
And I'm going to add in here because I think it's really important for the family that maybe doesn't have the same limits as another family. When that child is at your house and says, hey, I'm not supposed to do this, to make sure that your child knows, you know what? Everybody has different rules, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Because I can think of a specific time when one of my daughters was saying, oh, well, so-and-so's mom. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
No. God gives us our children to take care of, and that mom is doing what she needs to do for her child. Yeah. And no, we're not going to say X, Y, and Z is wrong. Maybe they do things differently, but different is not wrong.
Right.
It's
and
okay.
You're talking to both extremes, right?
Right.
So like if you're
okay.
If you have more limits in your household, explaining to your kid, you're going to go to some places where there's freedom. And you get those choices on whether or not you get to participate or you choose not to participate. That's totally yours. And if you're one that doesn't have as many limits, then when you go to someone that does, you're going to respect what people's limits are in that household, right? Yep. So both extremes, it's just a matter of respect and choices.
Yeah, I think we just have to make sure that we teach our children to respect, hey, we're not all the same.
Exactly.
I mean, and it starts with something little like their screen limits, but then that extends outside your household and outside your friendships to things in society and culture, and not saying, yeah, we can do that because they're doing that. No, but saying let's respect that they have made this choice.
Yeah,
absolutely. Right. And as this chapter goes on, there's the rhythms of screen Sabbaths. Again, picking even one day or one night as a start and just grow from there. Keep growing, if that's you. I love the generous exceptions paragraph. It's just saying like, don't be so hard on yourself. Like, yeah, it's really important. He did put this in there. When you have limits, it's important to follow them. So if you constantly breaking the limits, friend,
it's not a limit.
It's not a limit. Yeah.
He says, don't even say you're going to make these limits until you really are ready. You and your spouse, or you have decided, okay, we're in this together.
But if once a month there's a bad day, or if once a month there's some reason to celebrate,
somebody's
or
sick,
something,
or something to celebrate.
Someone's sick, exactly. Don't let your kids sit in the room by themselves all day and not be able to watch something. I can't imagine being that kid. I remember very vividly getting chicken pox and getting that spot on the couch to be able to watch TV all day long, and it felt great. But then also making off time a norm, like not having screens as an actual norm to be able to have as you're going through.
And with that is the idea that we hope to form an understanding of the power of silence in our kids. We live in an age where silence is kind of scary and rare. But really, I love, there's a quote on page 96 that says, if we do not teach them that silence is a sacred place where God speaks to us, then screens will make sure they never, ever discover it. And I just loved that because we've been talking in discipleship about this idea of being alone with God, with spending dedicated time in solitude and silence, in Sabbath, being unplugged from screens, being in the Word, or just being still and having that quiet time and saying, God, what is it that you need me to hear right now? And it's odd if you get to a point where it's silent and you immediately want to reach for your phone. Then maybe this is something you need to curate for yourself, but it's also a skill that we need to teach our kids, because the world is not going to invite them into silence. The world is going to continually put noise in their faces and stuff before them all the time. But we want to form them into an understanding and an appreciation of silence so that the voice of God can be heard.
And I appreciate where you went just then, because I think silence, and I was like, I can only imagine how rare silence is in some of our households.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so, but I appreciate what you meant by silence by the end, right? Is just the turning off the screen,
Unplugged,
turning off the music, the unplugging piece. Because part of curating this experience, and I really appreciate it, there's 2 or 3 more things I want to make sure I hit from this chapter. One was, if you take away the screens, you got to have something filling the void.
Yes.
So like the whole go outside and play, or playing board games together, or reading, and
Community,
curating that experience, having that communal experience. If you don't have the screens, community is the only thing that's it's not going to be sitting in your rooms and being bored. It's not going to be these other things. What are other things that you can be doing together? I appreciate it. But the second thing, when you do curate this experience and look for movies and stories, pick one that tells a good story. I thought that was so brilliant. I loved it. If you notice the scenes are changing, there's a lot of other things, you're not really invested in any of these characters, you don't really care what happens to them, it just seems silly and goofy, pick quality. Pick something that is more quality, telling a good story. It's like we talked about The Sandlot. There's so many great things to watch in that movie when your kid hits 8, 9, 10, and then look and keep going that with movies, books, TV shows, and choose well on that front.
I want to go back real fast to what you said about kids being alone and bored, but I think there is something to be said for time for that to happen.
Absolutely.
So don't feel like you have to now
You're not the clown, the entertainer. Yeah, no.
All of your child's time with them when those screens are gone. Because sometimes our screens have become babysitters, right? So that mom can do her thing. But sometimes it's okay for our kids to sit and be bored.
Absolutely.
That's it. And I see that. I've been out of the classroom for a few years, but that's something that our children kind of have lost the art of.
Yes,
is
absolutely.
What do you do when you're bored? Then you have to create something for yourself.
Yeah.
And try to figure it out. So
adults
leave
have to
time
do the
for
same
that
thing,
too. Oh,
right?
no
That's
doubt.
the
That's
thing.
why, it's quiet, I'm bored, let me grab my phone.
Yes, I'm sitting in a doctor's office, let me grab my phone. Right? And so that's adults, we have to do the same thing.
Yeah, so I just want to throw that in there.
No, that's really good. That's really good.
And on the same note, you were just talking about like pick things that are good stories. I like that it says pick media that expands or educates.
Yeah.
Things that expand the imagination or educate the mind. Do the same thing for yourself.
Yes.
When you're picking and curating for yourself, do the same thing.
Absolutely. But I love that boredom. Like, what do we do with boredom? What are different opportunities? And I appreciate how they, like, toward the end of the chapter 2, he mentions that, like, getting the projector out is tough when it comes time for family, when it comes time for actual screen time. Doing it takes a lot out. So it's more of an effort. Meanwhile, playing a game, reading a book, that stuff's more accessible. Turning on the fireplace, more easy to do, just having conversation, the guitar on the wall because he plays guitar and he can sing with the family. I loved that, making that stuff more accessible, because you talked about like doing the dishes, setting the table, cooking the meal. Like, find something that they can do, right? Obviously, don't get them in danger with a hot stove or a sharp knife. But what can they do to help make it happen?
And if you missed that part of the chapter, I don't think we really talked about it, but they said you're almost creating some obstacles to get to the media. So they got rid of their main TV and they had a projector that they had to get out and set up, and that's how they watched their movies on Friday nights and stuff. But ultimately, they found that it was kind of a hassle to get it out and set it up and do it. It was easier to do something else communal. They set themselves up for success by putting just a small obstacle in the way of their screen time. How cool is that? I just thought it was great.
Yeah, no, I thought that was good.
That was awesome. Page 107 has something I want to make sure that said. This is about that whole
shielding your kids from media.
The protection, because it's such a temptation. And I want to say this clearly too. I think I understand why it's such a temptation, and that is because the world is putting a lot of things in our media, in our books, in our things that are counter to what we believe, teach, and confess about what Scripture calls us to do and be. But I really appreciate what Justin says here. Our goal is not to protect our children from the world of immorality out there, but to teach them how to deal with the immorality that is out there and in here too. And he jumps down. He says, while I can speak only anecdotally, I have noticed in my own childhood a real difference between the kids who were raised with implausibly strict media boundaries and the ones who were, within boundaries, allowed to mature alongside their parents. The former tended to lose respect for their parents' impossible rules and consequently cast out all rules, while the latter tended to learn how to pick what to watch well. I thought that was so true.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about like the rebellion side of all of us.
Yeah.
And appreciate it. My final, at least I think one of my final spots, page 111. If our goal is to form our children and help them choose well, that is infinitely more possible and infinitely more valuable than doing things perfectly, right? So if our goal is not to make mistakes, then we're always going to feel like failures. So that's not the goal. It's just to help your kid navigate the world that we live in. And I appreciate it. We don't make our best decisions out of fear. We make our best decisions out of love.
Yep.
So if you're sitting there fearful of what your kid is consuming, fearful of the books they read and the movies, probably not the best posture to have when it comes to parenting.
Because it's about formation, and it's trusting that, you know, the Holy Spirit's going to guide you in your desire to be a faithful parent. I like on 108, it says, I will not be there the first time someone in school says a demeaning joke about a girl's body to my sons, but I can be there in movies where they do, and I can prepare them for how to react. That's the value of engaging in media with our kids. So, you know, that we're not trying to shut out any exposure of the evils of the world, nor are we trying to plaster it in our kids' faces, but we are allowing them to be exposed to the reality of the world and guiding them appropriately and pointing them back to Scripture, to the Bible, to recognize that there's brokenness. I love that out there in the world, but there's also brokenness in me, in you, in our family, in our home. And that's why Jesus came. And that's why loving him is important. And that's why his love is such a good news for us. You know, he addresses this brokenness.
And is that brokenness allowed in your house? I mean, that's the question I want to ask our listeners, right? Yeah. We know it is, because each and every one of us individuals have our own brokenness. As the next chapter, we'll talk about our own messiness.
Yeah.
But are your words, are your actions, are your expressions, the way you're living that community with your kids, sharing with them that brokenness is just a reality we're all living with and working through? And are you able to curate that experience then with them, right? That's the beauty of this.
It's encouraging, because I no longer have to be the perfect role model for my kids and never say anything wrong or never do anything wrong, but now I get to show them what grace is doing in my life. And I get to model for them what it looks like to humbly come to God and repent and to receive that forgiveness and to be transforming in front of them. Like our failures and our mess and our willingness to engage with the Holy Spirit are giving them a picture of what we hope they do. That's the best thing we can offer our kids.
And acknowledging that, you know what, you're not going to be perfect either.
No, exactly.
You're going to make mistakes just like I do.
Yep.
So folks, don't do the do as I say, not as I do.
That never works.
Actually do these things, put these limits of screen time boundaries. And as always, if you have questions, we're here, right?
Yep.
If this helped you, I mean, I remember reading this just feeling so full of life, like just such a great conversation happening in this book. Please go buy this book. Please read this chapter yourself. Habits of the Household, Practicing the Story of God in Everyday Family Rhythms, Justin Whitmel Earley. And join the conversation. Find us on the Facebook, Raise Them Up podcast. Make sure you include that word podcast. You can email us, raisethemup@trinitycline.org. Or you can just, share this with somebody or find us and ask questions. And continue with us on this journey, or don't. It's up to you. Next up is chapter 5 about family devotions. I think probably a little bit briefer than some of our previous episodes, but just because they do such a great job of being concise, pointing us back to a lot of the stuff that we talked about in season 2. And I'm excited for that one too. If you're curious at all, and I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of a preview when it comes to family devotions, similar to what we talked about here with Screentime. Even the baby steps matter.
Yes.
Even the baby steps matter. The baby steps are significantly more critical than any overhaul thing. So if you're interested at all in that conversation, join us next time on Raise Them Up. We'll see you then.